It's one of the weirdest stories ever. I mean, Lord Bracken, at the time 53 or 54-year-old friend of Churchill, and worked with Churchill and set up a school on the Isle of Skye, and basically attended that school, pretended he was a 17-year-old despite looking clearly in his 50s, and just told everyone, like, hey, I'm just some guy with an aging condition, but I am 16, 17. And he got whipped by the kids all the time. He made sure that they whipped him, and that the whole school was set up for the purpose of him being whipped.
Hello. Yes, you heard that story right. It actually happened, and is just one of the extraordinary tales from Andrew Gold, the author of Psychology of Secrets. He joins me to discuss the history of secrets, so we chat lies, spies, as well as Scientology, the Stasi, and a little homage to Louis Theroux, a master at uncovering secrets. Andrew, as well as being an author, hosts a wildly successful podcast and YouTube show, Heretics. He was an inspiration for me in setting up this podcast, and so it was very kind of him to chat with me. As ever, links can be found in the show notes, and please do share, and if you're really feeling generous, a kind review would go down very well. Plenty more aspects of history to come, and next week we begin our D-Day series commemorating the 80th anniversary as Saul David joins to discuss Pegasus Bridge and the Parachute Brigade, but until then it's Andrew Gold on the history of secrets. Andrew Gold, welcome to Aspects of History.
Thank you for having me.
And we are talking about your new book, The Psychology of Secrets, which, well, today for many listeners and viewers, this will be the history of secrets, but the psychology I'm very interested to talk about as well. So I thought we could probably start there, because you did a survey, I know, on your book, which you mentioned early on, with your many listeners on your YouTube channel. And I think you've also done a lot of analysis of secrets and how people hold them and how many of us hold secrets. So I wondered if we could just talk about that to start with, because I of course don't hold any secrets, and I wouldn't dream of revealing any if I did, which I don't. But 97% of people, so I'm obviously in the 3, but 97% do not hold secrets. Is that what
97% do hold? Yes, 97% of us have secrets. I mean, the thing is, we think of secrets as these overarching, mad, whispered narratives in our lives, and the reality is it's maybe I quite fancy that girl at work and my wife shouldn't know, and those kinds of things. So when you think of it that way, almost all of us do keep some form of secrets, and it's said to be extremely harmful, more so than just general stress in the way that it can cause sort of ulcers. It's said to even be able to potentially cause cancer. That's some of the studies that I've managed to find. And so it's a difficult thing to hold on. I mean, the psychology aspect, I think the best theories we have come from evolution, which is history to the extreme, I suppose. But if you think about tribes wandering about, it made sense that the tribes that had individuals within them who felt pain when they kept secrets and therefore had to reveal them to feel better, those tribes would have done better because there would have been more cooperation and better social cohesion. Those people would have not hidden food so often from the others and then gotten into big arguments and killed one another. So you'd like to think that that was a way over 300,000 years that we developed this coping mechanism and this way to spill secrets to an extent. And it's something in my book I call the fever model. Well, actually, I didn't coin that, but the fever model, basically it's thought that you have some sort of fever, just like a fever will take over your mind, like a physical fever, takes over your body, makes your body uninhabitable for a virus. A similar thing happens when you keep a secret. The fever sort of takes hold. You start to feel stressed, like Raskolnikov in Crime and Punishment. You can't really cope anymore. Your life goes into turmoil until you reveal the secret. Now, if your secret is something that's going to get you totally socially ostracized, you're just going to have to hold on to it. And there are a few people in my book who I go to meet who have secrets they just cannot reveal, and their lives are hell. I mean, again, from a historical point of view, Alan Turing is a prime example of somebody who had to keep a real big secret because it was related to his identity. Identity-related secrets are the hardest ones to keep, and he had to keep that secret lest he be put in prison just for, what we now think is a perfectly acceptable thing, to be gay and to be involved in gay relationships and such. So yeah, that's the sort of long and short of the psychology of secrets.
And so Turing's an interesting figure that you've mentioned, because he was quite a prominent figure by the time he was exposed. He had a successful war, and I mean, his secret destroyed him ultimately.
Yeah, well, he's one. Oscar Wilde's another one. He spoke so often about secrets and things being like a thorn plucked from his side, a secret was. And these are people who engaged in secrecy. I mean, Turing, code breaking was his life was secrecy. It wasn't just the secret he was keeping about his sexuality. There are all sorts of different kinds of secrets you can keep. There are aspirational secrets, which are often related to work. There are personal or relational secrets. And these kinds of secrets that they kept they covered all grounds. That's why they were such difficult secrets to keep, because they were ones you would keep from your friends because you don't want your friends to leave you, but also for any kind of ambition in work. They had to keep those secrets, and just to stay out of prison, for God's sake. I mean, awful secrets to keep. Nowadays, of course, you can be gay. That's fine. There are things you can't be, and perhaps rightly so. And there is a group of people in chapter 9 that I go and explore, and I don't know how much you'd want to talk about that on your podcast, because it is that controversial. Well, one person in particular I go to meet who's keeping a secret now that would probably get her killed by her village, and it's related to her identity. She's a 25-year-old woman, and that was interesting for me to go and see what that's like, to go and, in a journalistically gonzo kind of way, go and hang out with a 25-year-old keeping a secret like that.
And has she got sort of, you mentioned that the symptoms of keeping a secret, physical effects, physical symptoms. Is she experiencing anything like that?
Oh, yeah. I mean, look, when I went to meet her, this is this 25-year-old woman in a village in Germany, and I pulled up at the train station, and she saw me and she just burst into tears. I don't often have that effect on people. Maybe I do, but she was just in an absolute state. And it took hours and hours of trying to sort of calm her down and to be able to discuss her secret. And then once you do, she can't talk of anything else because it's so wrapped up in her identity. There's just nothing else. It's consumed her and changed what kinds of friends she's made and all those kinds of things.
It's incredible, actually, because a lot of the time when I was reading your book, I was thinking, and along these lines, actually, there's the author John le Carre, who I'm not sure if you're familiar with.
Oh, cool, yeah.
Brilliant spy writer. And he's had 2 biographies written by the same author come out within the space of about 7 years. And the first biography was written whilst le Carre was still alive. And it wasn't really an authorized biography, but it was a biography with the cooperation of le Carre, or David Cornwell, as he actually is. And in it, he is he worked for MI5 and then later MI6, and then became a writer. But the most recent biography has really delved into his sex life, because it has turned out that he was having a huge number of illicit affairs, often with the spouses of friends of his. And it is almost a replacement for his secret existence as a spy before he became a writer. So in order to replicate that secret life, he embarked on these sexual affairs with I mean, I don't know the actual number. I don't think anyone knows the number. He's died, and this is coming out now, and it's an extraordinary facet to someone that they want to prolong the secrecy by doing something else secret.
There's something called dramaturgical theory, which is a sort of posh way of saying, going about living your life with a mask, or the theory that we are all doing that, which we absolutely are. I mean, the way I'm talking to you right now is probably different to how I talk to my fiance later, and to a dog in the park or whatever it might be. We have these different faces and masks that we put on, and you can practice at that, of course. And it's that, what was the Shakespeare thing I keep forgetting? As every stage is a whatever. What's that expression? Shakespeare, every stage, what was it, or something? All the world's a stage, of course. It's one of the most, I don't know how I always forget that. Every time I'm talking about it, I forget that. All the world's a stage. And there are a lot of people who really believe that's the case. And you feel it happening with different friendship groups and things like that. There are great examples throughout history of people who have had to go and do that and become a totally different person. I talk about a police force in the UK, or part of the police force, who were going around with the left-wing activists, and they married them, which was just bonkers. And they had to become different people. And the wives didn't ever know that this police force, were police. They had these fake names and things. It was actually a horrible, horrible thing, abuse of trust. So a spy, or someone who's acted as a spy, will, of course, be used to that. They will have done it many times. They will be used to putting on this different kind of face, being a different person. I also talk about Lord Bracken. Do you know the story of Lord Bracken? Yeah.
I've just finished reading it. I mean, I didn't even know about this. This is unbelievable.
It's one of the weirdest stories ever. I mean, Lord Bracken, at the time 53 or 54-year-old friend of Churchill, and worked with Churchill, and set up a school on the Isle of Skye, and basically attended that school, pretended he was a 17-year-old despite looking clearly in his 50s, and just told everyone, like, hey, I'm just some guy with an aging condition, but I am 16, 17. And he got whipped by the kids all the time. He made sure that they whipped him, and that the whole school was set up for the purpose of him being whipped. And it's amazing, in terms of dramaturgical theory, you believe a lie enough, you tell yourself it's true, and you act confident enough, it's amazing what you can get away with. Obviously today you wouldn't be able to do that because of the technology and Google. People would have just recognized him as Churchill's, he was a wartime minister who worked with Churchill, so people would know that. But it really is extraordinary what you can get away with, and you get used to living this kind of lie. And I'm sure that John le Carré would also have been used to that. He might have got a thrill from it. He might be really good at it. And I guess when you're no longer doing that spying stuff, you're out doing all sorts of other secretive stuff, which is sleeping with his mates' ladies.
Do you think that there are nationalities that are more prone to secrets? Because the reason I ask is, often, and it's sounding like I'm obsessed with le Carré, but I'm not. But it's a great reference point, really, and when you're talking about secrets. In one of his books, I think it's Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, he talks about the secret services are the best kind of proponent of a nation, and that's why the British are sort of supposedly so good at it. In that they're so good that the spies are spying on their own spy agencies for the Soviets. But do you think there's something about, in Britain's case, maybe sort of slightly reserved characters, not really betraying our deepest, innermost thoughts? I've said I'm in the 3%. I'm probably am in the 97%. But one would, there are countries where maybe they're a little bit more honest and open. Would you? Is there anything in that?
Yeah, I'd say so. So it would have to obviously be, as you say, a cultural thing, not a biological thing. If you happen to be born somewhere, that's where you're born, and that's the culture you grow up in. And there is definitely something in the languages and the cultures. There's high context and low context. So Britain and Japan are high context cultures. It means that you don't say everything in the language. You imply things. Everything is said with a sort of smile and a wink, and you're never quite sure. And if you're not part of that, it's going to be very difficult. A lot of Americans struggle. And we often say, and I don't think this is actually fair, we'll say like, oh, Americans they don't get sarcasm. And it's not true at all. I mean, you look at Chandler Bing in Friends, he's like the most sarcastic. Could he be any more sarcastic? He's totally sarcastic. Of course they do. They just don't quite get our cues, our social cues. And why should they? They're not from our country. And their country is just so big and massive and open that we know their social cues. We watch all of their TV. So we have a better idea of them than they do of us. That's just, and most of the world does. And it makes them sometimes appear ignorant when they come to our places, and it's not really fair on them. So these kinds of, and I read something, it's not in the book actually, but I read something that Helen Pluckrose was saying recently about, and I don't know the exact names for it, but Japan and the UK are thought of as these island cultures, where because there's not so much space on the island, we have all these different kinds of social cues where it's polite to give people space and to not pry and to be very, what will seem to Americans as standoffish. America is this huge country with big, wide open spaces where people might feel a bit alone otherwise. So it's much more American to shout over to your neighbor, howdy, neighbor, that kind of thing. And they would see us as standoffish and rude, and we would see them as brutish and rude. And both are just unfair. They're just the circumstances that we have. So there's definitely that with languages. And languages themselves are not just cultures. I'm fascinated in. I'm a linguist myself. At the time, not linguist as in I've studied linguistics, but in terms of being a multi-linguist, and I love languages. And there are all sorts of different ways that you can keep things secret in some languages, but not others. So English is actually quite a good secret keeper because you can say, I'm going to meet a friend to your parents when you're 17. You don't have to specify that it's a girl or a boy. Whereas in Spanish, you would have to specify that. I told a whole story in the book about a friend of mine who, because I used to live in Argentina and he's English and his girlfriend was Argentinian. And when he said, I'm going out to meet a friend, he said about it was my friend. So he said, I'm going to meet Andrew's friend. I'm going to meet his friend. And she took his friend, to mean it's a boy because of the confusion of language. And when she later found out it was a girl, she was livid because it was like, you've lied to me and all this stuff. And it's like, no, English is just the better secret keeper in that instance. So he didn't reveal either way, and she couldn't grasp that concept. There are other languages that keep secrets better than us and others that give them away. So in Indonesian, I think it is, they have different kinds of no. So if you say no, one type of no, it means not yet. And the other type means no. So if you say to someone, do you have children? You have to either say not yet or no, and I'm never basically meaning I'm never going to. You have to reveal your entire intentions. Again, English is the better secret keeper there because in English you just say no, you don't have to specify anymore. So there's definitely something in languages and high and low context cultures that could make certain people more used to keeping secrets and maybe better at it.
I find that so fascinating. My wife's stepfather is Dutch, and he gets frustrated when I say things like, it seems as though we may have to do something. And what I'm actually saying is we definitely need to do that. But he reads it as something that's it's uncertain, and so he doesn't think he has to do it yet. And it makes him want to pull his hair out. And I suppose, and also when you speak languages, that's a bit of an act. When I speak French abroad, I'm almost acting. I become a little bit more effusive as well than I actually am.
Yeah, lower voice maybe. Sometimes you speak French, and then you go to Spanish, and you're like doing this whole, I have to speak like this. This is my different personality. Like, how can you not have a different personality when you're doing that in the actual language? I'm aware for listeners that I wasn't actually speaking those languages. I was just doing the accent there. But yeah, that's definitely true. And then also definitely that's a word in itself. That's a weird one. So we can do the opposite of what you've just said. Like, it seems like this, it seems like that. But then these countries that get used to speaking in a more direct way, they're also not really being direct. And we have that in English too. So everybody who says to me, I'll definitely get your book, they put comments under my YouTube, I'm definitely going to get your book, I'm immediately going, you will never get the book. Some say, I'm certainly going to get your book. It's only the ones who say, I'm going to get your book, that I think, oh, maybe they will. When they add definitely or certainly. And that was an interesting point again in the book about God. I think God's first lie, God tells the first ever lie, if you do believe the Bible. And it's something like, I can't remember exactly what it was, but he said, certainly, you will certainly, die or whatever if you eat from the forbidden tree. And it's like, well, why did you add that certainly? I don't trust you now. So when we add superfluous stuff, it's another part of making our language sound less sincere and less direct.
You mentioned Japan earlier, and I was thinking about that because I don't know if you've been watching the new TV show Shogun, which is it's fantastic. But and it's quite interesting because it's Japan. It's showing Japan when it has interaction with Westerners, but only for a very brief period. So only for around 100 odd years, from about 1550 to about 1650. I'm sure some Japanese scholar will pick me up. But then a new regime takes control in Japan and doesn't want any kind of interaction with foreigners. So it's almost like, the curtains are open and then they're closed again. And then there's no interaction because they want to keep the outside world a secret for another. You probably know all about this, but it's a secret for another 200 odd years until the Americans show up. Interestingly, portrayed in the film The Last Samurai starring Tom Cruise, who I'm sure we can get onto. But the whole country wants to keep the whole world a secret. It's extraordinary.
Yes, and there's that film Silence, is it? Scorsese. Did you ever see that? When is that amazing. Based? What sort of year is that?
No, it's Jesuit priests. That's exactly right. Yeah.
Huh. Yeah. So this is just something that countries and cults and things do. to keep control. And that's the basis, I think. Maybe it's the closest thing to a single premise of the book, although it's all sort of everywhere. I tried to do this Louis Theroux, John Ronson, meeting lots of weird and strange people, but then you try and bring it together with some sort of coherent direction. And absolutely, the way that people use secrets for power is just huge. And I go back to Wu Zetian, the first empress of China, who uses secrets in a very strange way. She even gets people to make up secrets. Her courtiers have to make up secrets and put them into a sort of secret box. And these will be secrets about other people, so she can get them to come and commit suicide in front of her. I mean, horrific, some of the things she was getting up to. So we know that keeping the outside world out is really important. One of the people I talked to is Julia Hart, the star of My Unorthodox Life, the Netflix series. She left the Hasidic Jewish community in Monsey in New York to become a sort of Kim Kardashian figure almost. And it's really interesting that she's gone the other way. You go from this super secretive community where nothing's allowed and you can't be gay and stuff like that. And now she's like super woke and on the other side, and she's like a Kim Kardashian. She's showing all of her life on TV. She's really rebelling against this kind of secret keeping and stuff, which I understand why she wants to do that. The amazing thing I found was just thinking about it was it's not just that cults keep the outside world out as they do. I mean, again, this echoes God with the forbidden tree of knowledge. I mean, the whole idea of religions and cults, the whole thing is don't go seeking other knowledge outside, and with like the Hasidic Jewish community, of course, you can't watch TV. You're not supposed to have the internet. You're not supposed to look around you or anything outside of the cult. But also how much cults keep from their own people. That's what I started to find really interesting. It's not just like this bubble where we have this information and you have that information. It's like you're not actually allowed to know about your own information. So the Hasidic Jewish women, for example, often knew nothing about the history and religion and why they were doing certain things. Scientology is a very modern cult, but so many of us now know about Lord Xenu because of the South Park episode, and there was a WikiLeaks about Lord Xenu, the galactic overlord. For anyone who doesn't know, it's this: he had overpopulation of billions and billions of people on his planet somewhere, and so he decided to send loads of them to whatever the name for Earth was, Tigi or something like that, and threw them all into volcanoes, and their spirits came out, and then those spirits were forced to watch lies about Christianity and Judaism and Islam, and that's why they now have the religions of today, but they're all lies, and Scientology is the real truth. And it's a whole thing, because L. Ron Hubbard was a sci-fi writer, and it goes into all this mad detail. But what's extraordinary is most Scientologists don't know that story. We know more than they do about their own thing.
That's level 3. You have to pay a lot of money to get to that, don't you?
Yeah, OT level 3, operating Thetan level 3, and yeah, you're paying hundreds of thousands of dollars by the time you get to. And if you're told that if you learn that early, you will die of pneumonia. So again, it's this forbidden tree of knowledge. You know, if you eat from the tree, you will die, which is just a lie, but it's a fantastic way to control people.
Yes, I was thinking about this when I was walking back from the station just now, actually, about if you have to lie to cover up your secret, you're in trouble. You don't want to get to the stage where you have to lie about your secret. And I was interested in this in the context of lie detector tests, the kit that all the FBI uses. I'm highly skeptical of whether they're any use. I imagine they can be. If you're cool as a cucumber, you can probably get away with it. So I'm skeptical of them. But that whole idea of lying means you're in a bit of trouble. It's far better to keep your secret a secret, so you don't even get to the stage where you have to betray it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I looked into lie detectors, and you're right. They seem to be between 60 and 90% accurate. Which, if you think about it, I mean, that is in itself remarkable that we've got a machine that can look inside people's heads, more or less. I mean, that's not what it's doing. It's measuring skin bits and pieces and dilations and tiny bits of sweat. It's measuring like a variety of things to see if you change. But I always think if you're a particularly nervous person, I mean, what they do is they have to set up this baseline where they ask you questions that are just boring about nothing for ages and ages and ages. And they're measuring how you are normally compared to what happens when they actually ask you about the case or whatever you're suspected of doing. And only then do they go into those questions. And they're marking the difference. So the extraordinary thing I came to learn was that psychopaths are actually no better than the rest of us at fooling a lie detector, which surprised me. because you would think they're just so cool and they don't care. But there's a couple of things. Firstly, because that baseline, they measure it so accurately that even the slightest changes already show us there's a difference. So they're already very cool. So even a little nudge of some sort of movement, that means, we know. And the other thing is they get something called duping or duper's delight. They're sort of enjoying that they're lying to you, and you can sense the slight difference. So they're not very good, but people who have done all sorts of practice the lie detector over and over again, they can be quite good. And I think her name was Ana Montes, who was a double agent who was actually working for the Cubans, and she passed a test in America because she had just practiced it so many times with the Cubans that she managed to pass a test and continue working, I believe, for the FBI. And she was only later found out because of some sort of leak, but nobody was onto her at all.
So you think lie detectors? Well, you know, because you've got the 60%, 90%. They are actually accurate then.
60 to 90%, but I mean, is that enough to send someone to prison? I mean, even if it's 90, which I think is a bit much, it's probably, let's say it's 60 or 70%. For every 10 people, you're sending 3 to prison for when they're innocent. So they can't be used in criminal cases. They can be used, though, I think, in some civil cases. That's changing, and it depends on the state and the country and everything like that. And prosecutors sometimes use it for various reasons. Sometimes you can try and get someone to think they've lied or been caught in a lie. There was a woman who was a Guantanamo Bay interrogator who I write about. She uses an old Game Boy and she attaches it to people, and they think it's a lie detector. But it's not. It's just a nonsense Game Boy. But she gets it to light up when she thinks they're lying. And so they think they've been caught in a lie, and then they tend to tell more because they don't want to be caught further in a lie. I mean, there was an episode of The Wire where they did something like that, and they got there were 2 suspects, and they had one of them in a room, and they said, "Look, your mate in the other room's told us everything. We've just got him a McDonald's to thank him for it, and he's now outside having a lovely McDonald's and enjoying his life because he told us that you did it all," and blah blah blah. And then they get the guy, the friend, to walk past the door holding his McDonald's, which then sort of makes the lie seem real to the other guy. So the other suspect is now going, hang on, I now need to tell everything. The first guy hadn't actually said anything. They just got him McDonald's. You can't do that in the UK because you're not supposed to lie to suspects. But in America, again, depending on the state, you can do that. So the really horrible thing here is Jeremy Kyle, and for those outside the UK, that's sort of the Jerry Springer of the UK. And everybody knew this.
Jerry Springer's that's being mean on Jerry Springer, who was by all accounts, a lovely man. I don't think that's the case with Jeremy Kyle, is it?
Well, you could argue, and you can argue this about me as well, that the sort of sensational stuff he was putting out was not really thinking about the guests first, and they both have this sort of bringing on working class people to be sneered at by elite people who watch TV. It's like a zoo watching this kind of thing, and so both of them can have those accusations labelled at them, I think. And look, I try not to. I'm not judging so much about that because people do what they do, and we watched it. So who are we to absolve ourselves of guilt and say it's all Jeremy and Jerry's problem? So fine. The issue, I think, is to bring out this lie detector every single time. Everyone in the UK, I think even more than on Jerry Springer, it was like the lie detector was the thing for Jeremy Kyle. Well, if it's 60% accurate, they did thousands and thousands of shows. So how many people were brought out? Already these are people who don't quite have the vocabulary to have this argument with Jeremy Kyle, and they're just being absolutely, torn apart by him. And there was eventually, as you probably know, there was one guy who killed himself, who'd been on the show. He, up until his death, was saying, no, I didn't cheat on my wife or whatever. And Kyle was shouting at him, going, well, what does the lie detector say? And he was in a right state. And we know that people who lose status in such a way, who have been called a liar and made fun of on TV, they can become suicidal. And that was it. That show was taken off the air. But it's incredible. It was allowed to stand for so long based on this lie detector, which we know is just not that accurate.
Yeah, I mentioned my stepdad again for some strange reason. He was talking about DNA testing, and you read in the newspaper they go, well, the suspect was identified with DNA because the scientists said that only 1 in a million. And well, I mean that means there are 65 people in the country possibly who could have been involved, or however many.
That's true.
So one area that you write about that I was interested in particularly given our recent experience that we've all been through of COVID and being locked up indoors, is the Stasi in East Germany, where everyone, and you've lived in Germany as well. So I'm sure you're very well aware of the experience of East Berlin and East Germany. When the wall came down, and I think the archives were opened in Berlin, in that huge building in Berlin, where East Germans discovered that so many of their friends and family were spying on each other. It's a quite horrible secret to uncover.
Yeah, a lot of people have deliberately chosen not to look up who had dobbed them in, or because unfortunately humans just get put into situations, and you think about Nazi camp guards as well and things like that, where you get put into these situations where it's just so unfair. But the Stasi had created this really authoritarian, oppressive system where people were framing one another by putting pornography in each other's mailboxes. I think pornography was like the worst thing in the Stasi time, which doesn't sort of make sense with today's leftist or even historically a leftist thing, because that often pornography and things like that are allowed, but obviously any kind of quasi-religious authoritarianism doesn't like pornography and uses it because they know that everybody likes it. They use it as a way to catch people and catch everybody out. But yeah, this is it. The Stasi were one of the most oppressive, authoritarian, high control groups that we've had. The paper trails and I don't know if this is just a saying or whatever, but they say the amount of paper could sort of stretch from the Earth to the moon that they created, or that there was more paper created during the Stasi time than throughout history before that, documenting everyone, keeping everyone in a perpetual state of fear. And again, it's like Scientology in that you have these hierarchical systems. If you're working for the state, that gives you something special. If you create a system whereby every single person in the whole country has job, that's what they have. Everyone has a job. Nobody's above anyone, nobody's below anyone. Well, it's natural in humans to have this inclination towards climbing hierarchies, so you'll find ways to do it. And some sort of guard comes to your door, someone working for the Stasi, and says, hey, we think you're really good at spying on people. We want you to be the top person. And then we won't also reveal your secrets. You'll be safe. That's very compelling, enticing. And so they would do it. And unfortunately, the people working for the Stasi themselves were also being set up all the time, and they were made to attend pornography premieres, for example, big cinemas full of pornography, and their attendances were noted so that if they ever spoke out, those pictures would float around and then they'd be in all sorts of trouble. So, the thing with the Stasi, in living in Berlin, that what was eye-opening for me was just how many people were nostalgic for it. Loads of people there. It's a very Western thing, and this is something we sometimes make mistakes with as travelers. We go to Medellin in Colombia, where I also used to live, and you start going, oh, hey, Pablo Escobar, hey, and it's like, that Escobar guy like tore apart your lives and killed loads of people. It's likely you have a grandfather or a father or something who was killed by Escobar. It's funny for us because we watched the TV series. And similarly in Berlin, you go over there and you start saying to them, like, gosh, that awful totalitarian thing, how awful. And they will, some of them, obviously many will agree with you, but some will be really insulted. And they've got this thing called Ostalgie, which is Nostalgie, and Ost, which is East, portmanteau, where loads of them, they think back and they were all employed, for example, so they didn't have to worry about that kind of thing. They had more women's rights, there were reproductive rights, so a lot of things that were taken away at the fall of the wall. But there was not individual freedom. You can look at the Hasidic Jews the same way. We look at it from our Western individualistic minds, and I'm a very strong, I love that. It's my favorite thing ever, individual freedom. I can't get enough of it. But some people don't. Some people love what they have there. And what they do have there in the Hasidic Jewish circles is storytelling, where they gather around, maybe they gather around a fire, and an elder from the group sits and tells these wonderful stories, and they're funny and everyone's laughing, and there's a togetherness and a love that maybe we don't have, maybe we've lost. The problem is, if any of them want something a little bit different, they pretty much aren't allowed to. And that's the lack of individual freedom. So we're always weighing up these differences between individualism and collectivism.
Yeah, and culturally, I know it's similar to sort of keeping secrets, but culturally, do you think, because in Germany, I remember reading the Jerome K. Jerome, I don't know if you ever read that, Three Men in a Boat, and then he does
No.
a sequel, Three Men in a Bummel. So this is in the 1910s, I think, before the First World War, 1900s. Sailing, they're sort of on a boat, on a bummel, going around the rivers of Germany. And in it, they say, oh, well, Jerome K. Jerome writes when he's in Munich, he attempts to cross a gardens in Munich, and there is a designated area where you're not allowed to walk on the grass. And being a typical Brit abroad, of course, he goes and walks on the grass. And then I don't think, I'm going to show you, rather inadvertently being a bit clueless, not intending to insult the locals. And he's immediately sort of accosted by both the gardener or the garden warden and the visitors to the park, the local visitors to the park. And he writes later that I think and he's writing before the Second World War, and he's saying, I think if ever an authoritarian figure rises, it'll be in Germany. And it's interesting that. So culturally, the reason why I mention this is it's sort of connecting us back to our recent COVID past, where my friend who lives just around the corner from me was telling me how he had someone in to fix something in his TV or something during the lockdown. And a day later, he had a note through his door saying, if you do that again, I'm going to call the police, from one of his neighbours. Mm-hmm. And it just did strike me as maybe that cultural thing. I don't know. There's something in the psychology of all humans where we're willing to, spy and reveal secrets to the authorities, knowing that could get you in some quite severe trouble.
Yeah, well, going back to that evolutionary theory, I think it makes sense, just as we reveal secrets, that you have people who want to get the secrets of others out. You've got to find out who's hiding food, and also you're going to individually rise to the top if you're able to get others arrested or thrown out of the tribe. You get them kicked out, you're gradually moving up, you're trusted, you get to the top. So again, it makes sense that we get a sort of dopamine rush from being gossip mongers and tattling on people. It feels good. We don't want to admit it, but it does feel good. And it feels good when we gossip about friends and we say, have you seen what they did? They were just doing this and I can't believe it. And you get to feel good by virtue of denigrating somebody else. It does seem like almost like we've got a half and half in the world, and I'm just speaking anecdotally here, but it feels like some of us just love following rules and others are almost made to rebel against them. I remember for me, when I started feeling that way I must have been about 13 or so, and I was at synagogue because I had to go to synagogue once or twice a year. But when I was 13, you had to go quite often. I'm an atheist now, but I had to go quite often for bar mitzvah parties. You have to always go and whatever. And I always remember, I don't know what I was doing, but there was a couple other kids my age who shushed me very loudly and said, quiet, the rabbi's speaking, have some respect. And I thought even at that age, I thought that's a strange way for a 13-year-old to speak and to police others. And from that moment, I thought, okay, I'm not like those people. And I respect people who break rules. Obviously, you don't want someone who's always breaking rules because that's going to be frustrating as well. You just want to hear someone speak, or you go to the cinema and people are yapping away and it's ruining it for everybody else. But I think a lot of us feel this way. And the reason I think that partly is because of the movies we watch and the people we admire. If you look at like Frank Abagnale in Catch Me If You Can, Leonardo DiCaprio's film, we admire these kinds of guys who break enough rules but we think of them as good people. I'm sure Clint Eastwood in his movies broke enough rules. We like rule breakers. And also, in terms of who we reveal our secrets to, we think that if you ask people, what kinds of people do you reveal secrets to? We tend to think we tell polite people. That's one of the top traits that we imagine we tell secrets to. And actually, politeness is an indicator of people who are less likely to be revealed to. We don't tell polite people because if you break down what polite just means that you adhere to societal norms of a particular time and place. So a polite slave owner would have kept slaves and done all of these kinds of things. A polite Nazi would have told on you. A polite COVID adherent would have told on their neighbors and things like that. Well, these are the last people you want to tell secrets to. So we actually tell our secrets to assertive people. So I spent a whole while like analysing a lot of old Louis Theroux tapes, who's a British journalist for anyone who's outside Britain, and watching how he talks to people, because he's known as someone who gets secrets told to him. And there are plenty of reasons for that. I mean, partly just being the journalist, that in itself is enough. That's quite an assertive thing. And it does create a kind of dynamic where you want to tell this person, because you know his job is to find out. All these cameras are here for it. You've set up a whole situation. Oh gosh, I don't want to let everyone down. A little bit like a magician when they hypnotize you. You feel a little bit like, oh gosh, I better sort of go along with this. But then also he's known as, I think people think of him as very mild-mannered and polite. But watching it back, he's
almost
not
diffident, isn't he?
Yeah.
The way he... Yes. So I think he sort of sucks people in, so they think, I'm sort of helping him out in a way.
The diffidence is interesting. That's a good word for it as well. There was a scene in particular that I analysed in the book where he asks a guy who happens to be the agent for a Ku Klux Klan head or something. You know, you were in prison, weren't you, for something? Just to the agent. And the agent thought he wasn't going to be part of the story. And he's like, I'm not talking about that. No, I'm not talking about that. And within like 3 minutes or 2 minutes, uncut, the documentary isn't cut at all, Louis gets everything out of him. So I was like, how has he gone from that to that? And what had happened was Louis starts to look diffident and uninterested. The guy says, I'm not telling you that. Let me show you the garden. And he takes him out into the garden. It's this beautiful vista of Texan hills and cacti and things. And there's a swimming pool and whatever. And the guy's showing him he's showing Louis his garden. But Louis starts to skip ahead of the guy. And now, even though the guy's showing Louis his garden, Louis walking ahead. It's a really strange thing to do. I'm not sure if he does it consciously, Louis, but it's just something he did. It's particularly strange. I used to present these documentaries, and so much time goes into making sure your face is on camera, their face is on camera. You're not creating a shadow on their face, anything like that. Meanwhile, we've got a whole 30 seconds of the back of Louis's head as he's walking ahead of this guy. And you're like, what's he doing here? But he just turns the whole thing on its head, because the guy is now chasing him and saying like, oh, here's another thing I did. Here's something else I did. And Louis is like, uninterested, a bit rude, brusque, but he gets the secret out of him, and it's not by being polite.
It's amazing. Yeah, what a skill to have. That. Yes. Well, Andrew, this has been fantastic. So I think I could probably talk to you for a lot longer, but I know you're very busy. And so, Psychology of Secrets, it's out now. All good bookshops. It's a very striking cover. Have you got a copy in front of us so you can?
I should do, shouldn't I? But
it's bright purple.
Yeah, I don't have one. It's bright
purple.
I've
only got the PDF, so I haven't got around to getting a real copy.
But you made it purple because just because the Psychology of Secrets sounded quite. It sounded very highbrow, and this is it has those moments in it, but it's very much, like I say, a John Ronson, a Louis Theroux. It's supposed to be a fun investigation. So purple felt like, hey, we're being a bit kitsch and almost 90s in that way. So that's what we did. But yeah, it's out, like you say, in all the places, Amazon. And if you do read it, please leave a nice review.
Indeed, and there are links as well. Did you study psychology, Andrew?
No, I studied literature, and I did a year in France, and then I went about learning languages. So that was the thing. And I actually said, I'm not a psychologist. We can't have that in the title, can we? And apparently people do it all the time when they're not psychologists. They haven't studied psychology. When you study English, you do a fair bit of Freud and Lacan and stuff like that. So looking at the language and things like that. But I interviewed a lot of psychologists for the book. So you get a bit of that from there. And then the rest of it's very journalistic.
Yeah. Well, I interview lots of historians and historians in inverted commas. So I wouldn't worry about that. Thanks, Andrew. This has been fantastic.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for listening. Please do get in touch if you like. history@aspectsofhistory.com, or there's the X or the Insta. And feel free to let Andrew know you're definitely going to buy the book. But in the meantime, thank you and good night.